Under the endless black sky of deep space, the alien vessel drifted in silence, its crew watching the blinking lights of their scanners. For many weeks they had searched for traces of human presence in the uncharted zone and had found nothing but dead rocks and empty gas clouds. Then it came suddenly, and without warning, a signal that should not exist. It was weak, buried under layers of static, but its signature was unmistakable. It was human, old yet alive, echoing from a planet marked in their archives as long abandoned. The crew exchanged uneasy glances, for this colony had been declared lost centuries ago during humanity's Great Retreat. No ship was ever supposed to call from there again. The alien commander leaned forward, his scaled fingers tapping on the control board as he stared at the readings. Something about the pattern of the signal disturbed him. It was not a cry for help, not a distress call, but something more controlled, more deliberate, almost as if the sender wanted to be found. His second officer whispered in a hushed tone that perhaps it was only a ghost frequency, a leftover loop from a dead world. But deep down the crew felt the weight of something larger, a presence behind that faint voice in the dark. The commander gave the order to alter course. They would investigate, for the Empire demanded knowledge of every secret, even those that smelled of danger. The journey to the planet was quiet, but not calm. The closer they came, the stronger the signal grew, repeating itself like a heartbeat. When at last the colony world appeared on the view screen, the aliens fell into silence. It was not the glowing green jewel of life their maps described. Instead, they found a world scarred with craters and fractured plains, a place that looked dead at first glance. Ruined cities stretched across the land like broken bones, their towers snapped in half, their streets drowned in dust. To any eye, it was only a tomb, yet the signal continued, pulsing with patience, as though the planet itself was breathing. The commander felt the hair rise along his neck ridges and ordered a scout ship to descend. The small vessel dropped into the atmosphere, cutting through heavy clouds and storms. The scouts reported strange findings. The ruins looked too intact, too organized, as if they had been arranged rather than destroyed. Roads that led nowhere formed sharp lines when seen from above. The houses had collapsed, but their patterns looked like symbols. One soldier joked that it felt like the ruins were watching them. Another reminded him not to speak such things aloud. But no one laughed. They all felt it, a quiet weight pressing on their chests. Something in those streets wanted them to keep looking. As the scouts walked the surface, they found objects that should not have survived the centuries, machines that still had faint power, metal that showed no rust, glass that was unbroken despite the storms. Their scanners failed again and again, jammed by invisible interference. Even the air itself hummed with energy, low and steady, like a deep growl just beyond hearing. The lead scout reported that he had seen a reflection, not his own, but something else moving among the shadows. The transmission cut for a moment, then returned, his voice shaken but firm. He swore that a pair of human eyes had looked back at him from the darkness of a shattered wall, orbiting above. The main ship tried to analyze the planet, but its instruments gave only confusion. Heat signatures shifted like shadows, structures appeared and vanished, and energy spikes erupted at random. The commander clenched his jaw. This was no dead colony. Something lived here, something that understood how to hide from prying eyes. He considered pulling back, but his pride forced him to push forward. To turn away now would be weakness, and weakness was a word forbidden in their empire. He ordered more ships into lower orbit to begin a full scan. It was then that the first ship vanished. There was no explosion, no warning. The crew simply watched the screen as the vessel blinked off their displays as though it had never existed. Sensors detected no debris, no trail, no radiation burst. It was as if the planet had swallowed the ship whole. Panic spread through the bridge officers, calling out in fear. But the commander silenced them with a roar. He demanded answers, yet none could explain what had happened. The only thing certain was that a warship had ceased to exist in the blink of an eye. And through it all, the human signal continued to pulse, steady and unbroken, as if mocking them. The silence after that was heavy and cold. The crew felt as though invisible eyes were crawling over their skin. The second officer whispered that they should leave, but the commander stared at the planet below with narrowed eyes. His instincts screamed at him to retreat, yet something deeper told him that if they left now, the secret of this world would follow them. Perhaps worse than losing a ship would be letting humanity's ghost slip into the shadows again. He gave the order to hold position. They would send more teams. They would dig into the heart of this colony and uncover its truth, no matter what price was paid. Far below, deep within the broken earth, machines stirred. Ancient systems blinked awake. After centuries of silence, vast tunnels lit up with hidden power and armored doors rumbled as they unlocked. The planet itself seemed to shift, as though it had been waiting, patient and hungry. The ruins above were only masks, clever disguises meant to lure intruders closer. Now the time had come. As the aliens stared at their scanners and argued about their next move, something old and human began to wake beneath the soil, and its first thought was simple and cold. The enemy had arrived, and the game was about to begin. The ruins of the colony lay silent under the stormy sky, but the alien scouts walking its cracked streets felt the silence pressing on their ears like heavy hands. Every footstep echoed too loudly. Every broken window seemed like an eye. They carried scanners, but the devices were useless, their screens filled with static and false images. One of the scouts cursed and kicked the machine, but it only buzzed harder as if mocking them. The commander's voice came from their earpieces, harsh and demanding. He ordered them to push deeper into the city and find the source of the human signal. None dared refuse, though unease twisted in their stomachs like knives. As they advanced, they passed statues covered in dust. At first they thought these were monuments to forgotten heroes, but when the dust fell away, the forms were revealed. As machines shaped like men, their faces were featureless, smooth, and cold, yet their stances looked as if they were waiting to move. The soldiers whispered nervously, were these human art pieces or something more? The lead scout struck one with the butt of his weapon, expecting hollow stone, but the sound was metallic, deep, alive. The statue did not break. Instead, its surface shimmered faintly like armor that had only been sleeping. The soldiers pulled back, their voices rising in alarm, but the commander barked through the cums for them to keep moving. He would not allow fear to make them retreat. Deeper in the ruins, they entered what had once been a wide square, its ground cracked and littered with shattered machines. Strange lines ran across the stone, sharp angles that seemed meaningless, until one soldier climbed to a higher point. From above, he realized the lines formed a perfect symbol, etched into the city itself. It was not random ruin, but design. The shape was an ancient human military emblem. Scout reported this discovery. In a trembling voice, that was when they heard the first sound that did not belong to them. A faint metallic clicking, steady and close, echoed from the shadows. Weapons were raised, but the clicking grew louder, spreading around them in a circle. The ground shook suddenly. From beneath the rubble, metal limbs clawed their way out. Machines rose covered in dust, their glowing red eyes cutting through the storm-dark air. They were not broken statues, were war drones, ancient but still alive. Their movements were precise and deadly, their armor untouched by time. The scouts fired, their weapons flashing, but the drones absorbed the blasts with barely a mark. In seconds, 3 soldiers fell, their screams cut short as the machines closed in with blades and energy bolts. The survivors ran, shouting for extraction, their voices filled with terror. Overhead, the command ship tried to lock on to them for retrieval, but the interference grew stronger, blinding their systems. The commander shouted into the comms, but only static answered. One scout, desperate, turned into a narrow alley and stumbled into a building half-collapsed. Inside, he found walls lined with strange pods. At first, he thought them broken stasis chambers, but as his flashlight passed over them, he froze. Inside one pod, a human face pressed against the glass. The eyes were closed, but the chest moved, slow and steady. They were not dead. They were sleeping. The scout whispered in disbelief, but before he could speak further, the pod lit with a soft glow. The human's eyes snapped open. They were cold, sharp, and filled with awareness. The soldier fled screaming, his words broken and frantic. "They're here. They're alive." His transmission ended in a burst of static, cut short by the sound of metal tearing. From orbit, the alien crew watched their displays flicker. Energy spikes erupted across the planet like stars igniting, one after another. What had seemed like ruins were now giving off power signatures strong enough to rival warships. Underground bunkers lit up, massive doors beginning to open. The planet was changing, and the commander finally realized the horrible truth. This was not a dead colony. It had never been abandoned. It had been hidden, prepared, armed in silence for centuries. A sleeping war machine waiting for a trigger. And their arrival had been the trigger. Panic spread across the bridge. Officers begged to retreat, but the commander's pride chained him to his seat. He ordered heavy bombardment of the surface, demanding the colony be reduced to ash. Weapons charged, energy crackling along the battleship's cannons. But before they could fire, the ground of the planet split apart. Great towers rose from beneath the earth, their tips glowing with terrible light. They fired beams of energy that tore through the storm clouds and struck the fleet. One alien warship exploded instantly, another spun out of control, burning as it fell toward the surface. The commander's eyes widened in horror. The colony itself was fighting back, not as broken ruins, but as a fortress world designed for war. The surviving scouts on the surface screamed through the coms, their voices filled with fear and despair. They had come seeking a ghost, but they had awakened an army. And above it all, cutting through the chaos, came a voice across every channel, human and steady, carried with absolute certainty. "You should not have come here." The alien fleet hung above the planet, broken and unsteady. Smoke trails marked where two of their ships had fallen, burning through the atmosphere like dying stars. On the ground, their surviving scouts were trapped inside the ruins, running. Through collapsing alleys, as war drones hunted them with cold precision, the commander stood at the center of the bridge, his jaw tight, his claws digging into the arm of his chair. He had expected ruins, dust, and perhaps a few starving survivors. Instead, he faced a planet that breathed like a soldier, a colony that was not asleep but waiting. The human signal that had lured them here continued to pulse in his ears, calm and steady, as though mocking his every command. Beneath the broken streets, the earth itself trembled. Massive underground doors groaned open, spilling clouds of steam into the air. From the chasms below, machines began to rise. They were not small drones like those in the city, but towering constructs, armored in black steel, their frames etched with markings of an old human army. Each carried weapons too large for the aliens to comprehend, designs thought impossible for a colony cut off from the galaxy for centuries. They stepped onto the surface with slow, deliberate power, shaking the ground with each movement. From orbit, the fleet's scanners detected energy readings so high they rivaled entire battleships. The commander felt the first true weight of fear press against his pride. Inside one of the ruins, a wounded scout crawled through the dust, his voice broken as he reported what he saw. His camera shook wildly, but the feed showed the impossible. Farms that had looked long dead were splitting open, the soil peeling back like a lid to reveal armored plating beneath. What had once seemed like fields of stone were in truth the tops of bunkers, their camouflage breaking apart. The scout coughed. Bludden cried out that the colony was never meant to live as farmers or settlers. It was built to fight. Before he could say more, his transmission ended with a burst of static and the shadow of something enormous passing over him above. The commander's officers argued, panic clear in their voices. Some demanded retreat, others insisted on continuing the bombardment. But every time they charged their weapons, the colony's towers responded, beams of light ripping across the sky. Already, 3 more ships were crippled, their hulls burning as they fell into the storms below. The commander silenced his crew with a roar, though fear ate at his heart. He realized this was no coincidence. The humans had designed this place as a trap. Every ruin, every shadow, every silent street was a weapon in disguise. They had not stumbled upon an abandoned colony. They had walked into the teeth of something older, colder, and prepared, far below the surface, deep in the hidden. Tunnels, lights flickered on after centuries of darkness. Screens glowed, machines hummed, and sealed chambers opened with bursts of steam. Within them, rows of cryosleep pods shone softly, their glass lids sliding away. Human figures lay inside, pale but alive, their eyes closed as if in deep dreams. One by one, the pods released their sleepers. One by one, human eyes opened. Soldiers stepped out, armed with weapons that had waited with them in silence, armor that gleamed as if it had been polished yesterday. They did not speak, did not question. They only moved as if their orders had been given long ago, and nothing had changed since. On the surface, the ruins shook as tunnels beneath burst open, spilling armored vehicles onto the streets. The alien scouts still alive screamed into their coms, begging for rescue as massive human war machines rolled past. Them no one answered. The commander's ships above tried to pull them back, but the colony's interference made it impossible. Their cries were cut short one after another, leaving only static. The commander clenched his fists, his pride now drowned by the heavy truth. This was not a battle they had started. It was a war they had woken, and they were already losing. From the heart of the colony, a new signal rose. It was no longer just the faint human code that had drawn them here. It was stronger now, sharp and clear, spreading not only to the alien fleet but into the wider channels of space. The message was brief, only a few words, but it carried the weight of iron. Project Iron Dawn, awakening. Enemy sighted. The alien officers paled as they heard the translation. They understood now. This planet was not just a settlement, not just survivors clinging to life. It was a fortress, a secret designed by humanity long ago, waiting for the moment the enemy would come close enough to strike. The commander gave the order at last to retreat. His pride shattered, his heart racing with fear. But as the ships turned to escape, the colony responded. Great orbital weapons hidden in mountain ranges emerged, their barrels glowing with deadly light. The first blasts tore through the fleeing ships like knives through paper, one by one. The fleet was carved apart, leaving only fire and silence in the void. The commander realized with horror that the humans were not just defending. They were hunting, eliminating every ship to ensure no one could escape to warn the others. This was not survival. This was strategy, and it was perfect. As the last surviving ship struggled to flee, the human signal cut across every channel one final time. It was a voice, calm and cold, carrying no mercy. You should not have come here. Now you cannot leave. The commander closed his eyes, his breath shallow, as the planet's weapons turned toward him. He understood now that this was not first contact. This was the awakening of something his empire could never control. The colony was alive, and its war had only begun. The sky above the lost colony was no longer empty. Hours after the first fleet was torn apart, the Empire's reinforcements arrived in force. Dozens of warships slid from hyperspace in perfect formation, their hulls gleaming like blades. The alien admiral, far more experienced than the fallen commander, stood at the center of his flagship, his voice calm but edged with confidence. He had studied reports, dismissed the panic in the transmissions, and believed this was nothing more than a colony armed with leftover machines. His fleet was vast, disciplined, and powerful. He would burn the ruins to ash and erase humanity's last shadow from the galaxy. That was what he told himself. But as his fleet spread across the black void, he felt a strange silence, a quiet that clung to his skin like cold mist. The planet below waited, calm and still, its surface dark except for the faint glow of storms.
Ice.
It looked dead again, as though mocking him, daring him to strike first. The admiral ordered a precision bombardment. Beams of fire shot from orbit, ripping across the colony's surface. Dust and flame rose high, swallowing the ruins. The alien crew cheered as buildings crumbled, convinced the threat had ended. But their joy lasted only seconds. From the smoke, lights emerged, hundreds of them, glowing like eyes in the dark. The bombardment had not destroyed the colony. It had awoken it. Entire mountain ranges split open, their peaks unfolding like jaws to reveal massive cannons buried. Inside, valleys collapsed to expose hangars, where ships older than the Empire rose on engines that burned with unnatural fire. What had looked like stone was steel. What had looked like ruins was armor. And what had seemed abandoned was a fortress world bristling with weapons. The Admiral's smile faded as the truth carved itself into the stars. This planet was not a mistake of history. It was a war machine waiting for its first enemy. The first blast struck the Admiral's fleet before his crew could even react. A lance of energy cut through 3 cruisers in a single line, their bodies exploding in silence. Massive rail weapons, fired from the surface, hurling projectiles the size of towers that shredded shields as if they were paper. The Admiral roared for counterattack, but the fleet was already in chaos. Their formations broke apart as hidden orbital platforms revealed themselves. Camouflaged among the storms, spitting fire from above and below. The Admiral realized with horror that his fleet was not besieging a world. His fleet was trapped inside a kill zone that had been designed centuries ago, down on the surface. Human war machines advanced through the ruins, pushing aside rubble with unstoppable steps. Their armor gleamed with strange symbols, marks of units that had once fought in humanity's forgotten wars. Drones filled the skies like swarms of metal birds, chasing down the last of the alien scouts. The streets that had looked dead now pulsed with light as bunkers opened and factories roared to life. In moments, the colony transformed from a graveyard into a living army, its heartbeat steady, its weapons awake. Among the soldiers stepping from their cryosleep pods, commanders moved with practiced calm, their faces cold with purpose. Yet they had been waiting for this. To them, centuries of silence were only a pause between battles. Now the war had resumed, from orbit. The Admiral watched as one of his carriers was torn apart by a swarm of missiles, each one guided with terrifying precision. Another cruiser was dragged into the atmosphere by gravity weapons hidden in the planet's core, burning alive as it fell screaming. He shouted for his fleet to pull back, but every retreat path was cut. Asteroids that had drifted harmlessly in orbit suddenly came alive, revealing hidden engines. They moved into position, sealing the escape routes, locking the fleet into a cage of fire. The Admiral's second officer whispered that this was impossible. No colony could have built such weapons alone. No colony could have hidden them for so long. But the Admiral knew the truth that twisted his stomach. This was not a colony. This was a design, a plan left by humanity itself, and they had walked straight into it. The Admiral finally opened a channel to the planet below, demanding to speak with whoever commanded this nightmare. For long seconds there was only silence, the hum of static filling his ears. Then a voice answered, human, steady, and sharp. You came to conquer ruins. You found soldiers. This world is not yours to take. It is ours to use. The voice carried no emotion, no anger, only certainty. It was the certainty of an enemy who knew they had already won. Caught in his throat, he had fought many battles, had faced rebels, pirates, and rival empires. But never had he heard such calm in the face of war. His officers begged for orders, but for the first time in his long career, Admiral had none. On the planet's surface, deep within the control bunkers, the human commanders watched the alien fleet tear itself apart in panic. They did not celebrate, did not cheer. To them this was not victory, only routine. For generations they had trained. Their purpose passed from one sleeper to the next. Their mission etched into the very bones of the colony. They were Project Iron Dawn, built to rise when the enemy came, and the enemy had finally arrived. The colony's weapons fired again, tearing apart another line of ships. Above the battlefield, fire spread across the stars, but the humans did not look up in wonder. They only moved to the next target, their faces set like stone. As the Admiral's flagship shuddered under impact, he realized the truth that chilled him to his core. The Empire had not discovered a forgotten world. They had awakened a blade, sharpened in silence. That blade was pointed not only at his fleet, but at the galaxy itself. The colony was no longer lost. The war machine had been revealed. and it was only the beginning. The fires of battle still burned in orbit. Alien ships scattered and broken as the war machine of the human colony tightened its grip. The Admiral's flagship shook under every impact, alarms screaming as systems failed one by one. His crew shouted in panic, their once perfect discipline shattered by the chaos. He had believed overwhelming numbers would bring victory. But now he saw the truth. Numbers meant nothing against an enemy that had prepared for centuries in silence. The planet below was not simply defending it, was orchestrating. Every shot, every trap, every weapon placement felt deliberate, as if the humans had studied this moment for generations. The Admiral could not understand how, but he knew they had walked into a war that was already written before it began. Deep beneath the surface of the colony, in the heart of its command center, a chamber hissed open. Frost spilled across the floor as a cryosleep pod unlocked with a low rumble. Inside lay a man, pale from centuries of frozen time, his face lined with scars earned long before his long sleep. His eyes opened slowly, steady and sharp, as though he had never been asleep at all. He sat up, his breath forming white mist in the cold air, and for a long moment he said nothing. Then, with a voice calm and heavy with command, he asked one question. "Has the enemy come?" The soldier standing nearby, armored in steel and bearing the insignia of Project Iron Dawn, saluted and answered, "Yes, Commander. The trap is sprung." The man stepped from the pod, his body still stiff but his movements purposeful. Around him, other pods glowed faintly, holding more officers, more leaders, more minds from an age of war. But it was he who had been chosen to wake first. He was the architect of the plan, the guardian of this world's secret. His name was Commander Rael Marcus, a soldier of humanity's final wars. While empires had risen and fallen, while the galaxy had forgotten humanity's true reach, he had waited here in silence. Now the silence was broken, and his mission was alive again. He walked to the central command table, where screens displayed the battle above. Alien ships burned across the sky, their formations shattered. Marcus studied them without emotion. He had seen enemies like this before, arrogant and sure of their strength, and he knew how to break them. With a simple motion of his hand, he summoned tactical reports from across the colony. Underground factories had already awakened, churning out drones and weapons. Orbital platforms reported steady fire. Soldiers, fresh from cryosleep, moved into position without hesitation. It was as though the centuries of waiting had never happened, as though they had only closed their eyes for a brief night's rest before battle, on the alien flagship. The Admiral finally regained his voice. He demanded to speak again with the human commander he had heard faintly through intercepted signals. At first there was silence. Then the screens across the bridge flickered, and a human face appeared. Marcus stood straight, his scarred face calm, his eyes piercing through the static, as if he could see every soul aboard the ship. The Admiral froze, his words caught in his throat. The human spoke first, his voice steady and heavy with the weight of command. "You believed this world was forgotten. You believed humanity was broken, but we are still here, and we remember." The Admiral snarled, trying to mask his fear with pride. He called Marcus a relic, a fool clinging to dead wars, and boasted that his empire stretched across hundreds of systems. He claimed that no hidden colony could defeat the tide of his people. Marcus only tilted his head slightly, his expression unchanged. "Your empire is a shadow. Numbers mean nothing. You walked into a blade that has been sharpened longer than your kind has drawn breath. This world is not a colony. It is a weapon. And now it has chosen its target." His words cut deeper than any cannon fire, and the bridge crew shivered as though the temperature had dropped. The Admiral ordered his remaining ships to focus fire on the planet's command centers, desperate to silence the human's voice. Beams of energy rained down, tearing across the surface. For a moment, the Admiral allowed himself to hope. But then Marcus raised a hand over his own console and gave a single order: phase the shields. Instantly, the colony's hidden generators roared awake. Energy fields shimmered over the surface, bending and twisting the alien blasts until they scattered harmlessly into the storms. The Admiral's crew cried out in disbelief. Centuries-old technology had just nullified their most advanced weapons, as if they were children's toys. The Admiral's hand shook as he realized what they were facing. This was not outdated human tech. This was knowledge from a war his empire had never even understood. On the surface, human soldiers marched out of their bunkers, their armor gleaming with fresh power. They moved without fear, without hesitation, for they had been born into this mission. For them, waking into battle was not strange, it was destiny. Above, drones swarmed the alien ships, cutting them apart piece by piece. The Admiral screamed for retreat, but Marcus's voice cut across every channel once more. You do not retreat. You do not leave. You entered Iron Dawn, and Iron Dawn does not release its prey. The alien crews felt their blood run cold. For the first time, they realized they were not fighting survivors. They were fighting executioners. The Admiral, desperate and trembling, turned to his crew. He told them they must send a message to the Empire, a warning that this planet was death itself. But as he gave the order, every communication channel on his ship went dark. Marcus stood on the screen, his expression still calm, and said, "No one will hear you. Your fleet dies here, in silence. The galaxy will not know until it is too late." The Admiral sank into his chair, his pride shattered, his voice lost. Around him, his officers looked at him with fear in their eyes. They knew the truth now. Their enemy was not only alive, their enemy was prepared, patient, and merciless. And as the battle raged on, Commander Marcus watched with the calm of a man who had been waiting his entire life for this single moment. To him, this was not the beginning of war. This was simply the continuation of humanity's will. And that will, sharpened by centuries of silence, was unstoppable. The galaxy remembered that day as the moment when silence broke into thunder. The alien fleets had gathered in orbit, their ships blotting out the stars, forming a wall of steel and fire that no ordinary colony could stand against. For the alien commanders, it was supposed to be the end, a simple strike to erase the humans before their secret could spread any further. But down on the surface, the colony was no longer hiding. For years they had buried their strength beneath farms, towns, and dust, waiting for the right moment. Now, as the sky filled with enemy warships, that moment had come. The first sign was the ground itself shaking. To the alien scanners, it looked like earthquakes, but the truth was far worse. The earth split open as massive armored platforms rose from deep underground silos, machines that had not seen light in decades. Towers unfolded, barrels the size of houses clicked into place, and old but deadly missiles lifted into launch racks. The humans had built not a colony, but a fortress disguised as a settlement. The aliens had walked into the trap. Captain Arvin watched from his command bridge, his eyes wide. He had been ordered to take the colony in a single strike, but nothing in his training prepared him for what he saw. The planet's surface glowed with power grids and magnetic shields flaring to life. It was as if the humans had built a war machine the size of a world. His officers waited for his command, but for a long moment he could not speak. In his heart, he realized what they all feared. This was no longer a mission of conquest. This was survival. The first human strike came without warning. A hidden cannon, camouflaged inside what looked like a mountain ridge, erupted with a blinding beam that tore through the nearest alien cruiser. As the ship exploded in silence, breaking apart like fragile glass, its pieces falling like burning meteors. Panic spread across the alien coms, their careful formation breaking apart as captains shouted over one another. But the humans were not done. More weapons powered up, and the air shook with the sound of missiles screaming upward, leaving bright trails against the black sky. The aliens fired back, their warships raining plasma down upon the surface. But the colony's shields burned bright, absorbing the energy. Some blasts did break through, tearing into the ground and leaving fire in their wake. But with every strike, the humans answered with two. Mines buried in orbit detonated, shredding enemy fighters before they could even reach atmosphere. Automated drones launched from hidden hangars, swarming into space like angry hornets. What had looked like a peaceful settlement hours ago was now a battlefield engineered with patience and cold precision. In the middle of it all, Commander Hale stood in the underground control hub, calm but fierce. His people had waited generations for this day. They had lived in secret, worked in silence, building weapons while pretending to be farmers, workers, survivors. Hale's voice was steady as he gave orders. Do not waste shots. Make every strike count. They think we are prey, but today they learn what we are. His crew obeyed without hesitation, their hands moving over old consoles that hummed with new life. The humans were not fighting to win glory. They were fighting because they had no choice. That made them unstoppable. Above, the aliens tried to regroup. Admiral Rather, commander of the invasion fleet, barked orders, but even he felt the weight of dread creeping in. Ports flooded in, losses mounting, formations breaking, weapons unable to penetrate human defenses. Had studied humans in archives, reports from old wars that spoke of their stubbornness, but he had never believed them. Now, seeing his ships torn apart by a colony that should not exist, he realized the truth. The humans did not bow.
Ow!
They endured, they hid, and when cornered, they struck with fury. The tide of battle grew worse by the minute.
Ow!
Human war machines, shaped like beasts of steel, rolled across the plains, firing upwards at ships trying to descend. Entire valleys lit up with energy grids that caught enemy vessels in webs of lightning, dragging them down to crash into the ground. From orbit, the aliens watched their fleet dwindle, their weapons becoming less and less effective.
Ow, the humans.
Were fighting not just with machines, but with strategy. Every strike was calculated, every move prepared long ago. For the colony's people, there was no fear anymore. Families that had once lived quietly underground now stood in shelters, listening as the walls shook, but they did not cry. They knew this was the moment their ancestors had built toward. The war machine that had slept beneath their feet for generations had finally awakened. Children whispered to each other that the sky itself was roaring for them. When the battle reached its peak, the aliens realized the bitter truth: they could not win. What they had thought was a lost, forgotten colony was actually a spear aimed at their empire's heart. Every second they stayed, that spear drove deeper. Some ships tried to retreat, breaking formation, but the humans anticipated it. Traps triggered in orbit, mines ripping apart fleeing vessels. It's making escape costly. Admiral Rather gave the order he never imagined he would: a full retreat. His voice shook as he said it, knowing that history would remember him as the first commander forced to flee from humans, who were supposed to be extinct in this corner of space. As his fleet limped away, burning and broken, the humans did not chase. They simply stood their ground, letting the galaxy know one thing: the colony was no longer lost, and it would never bow again. When the dust cleared, Commander Hale looked at the war-scarred horizon. His people had survived, but he knew this was only the beginning. The aliens would come back with greater force, and the galaxy would whisper of what had happened here. He allowed himself one grim smile. Let them whisper, let them fear. The humans had roared once, and now the stars themselves would never forget the sound.